Alone, but unstoppable. The paradox of solitary power. Let me ask you something that cuts deeper than we usually allow ourselves to go. Why is it that some of the most powerful people in history, the ones who shook the world, changed culture, and redefined human potential, walked their paths alone? We romanticize the notion of belonging, of being liked, of being surrounded by support. But when we look closely, when we strip back the illusions, we see a pattern that repeats across time and space. Solitude is not weakness, it is not loneliness, it is the crucible of transformation. And in that silence, in that radical separation from the crowd, something paradoxical happens. You become unstoppable. But let's be clear, this isn't about isolation for the sake of drama or aesthetics. It's not about being edgy or emotionally distant, but it's about the deeper philosophical truth that Carl Jung, Na, Kierkegaard, and even ancient mystics all whispered in different languages, but that true power requires separation. Not forever, not in bitterness, but for a season, for a purpose. Because we cannot hear our own voice when it's drowned in the noise of the world. And most of the world is noise, expectations, projections, distractions, comparisons. We are trained from childhood to look outward for validation, for meaning, for direction. But what if the real signal, the only signal, comes when we walk alone? Imagine this. You're standing at a crossroads. To the left is the well-trodden path, filled with familiar faces, encouraging voices, and the comforting rhythm of conformity. To the right is a narrow, winding road that disappears into a forest of uncertainty. No one is there, no one applauds you for choosing it. In fact, most people don't even see it. But something pulls at you. A whisper not from outside, but from within. And here's the terrifying part. You know that if you choose that path, you will lose people. You will face doubt. You will question your sanity. But you also know, deep down, that your power lies only down that road. Why? Because power is not about control. It's not about dominance. It's about clarity. And clarity can only be born in solitude. When you strip away the noise, the opinions, the false identities, what remains is something unshakable, something eternal, your essence, your will, your knowing. In knowing. But most people never get there. Most people are too addicted to belonging, too terrified of rejection, too uncomfortable with silence. So they stay plugged into the matrix of approval, endlessly scrolling, endlessly comparing, endlessly performing. Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights. But here's the paradox. The more you need people to like you, the less powerful you become. Because every ounce of your energy goes into managing perception rather than embodying truth. You become a mirror for other people's expectations instead of a beacon for your own vision. And you can't lead like that. You can't create like that. You can't live like that. Not authentically. Not fully. Now, this doesn't mean you reject connection. It doesn't mean you become a hermit. It means you understand that solitude is the birthplace of all greatness. But every revolutionary idea, every artistic breakthrough, every spiritual awakening began with someone sitting alone, listening to something deeper than the world around them. Moses on the mountain, Buddha under the tree, Christ in the desert, Jobs in his garage, Jung in his tower, Wolf in her room of one's own. They weren't running from the world. They were retreating from the noise to return with something real. So here's the question that breaks most people open. Can you be alone without being empty? Can you walk away from the crowd not in anger, but in clarity, and trust that the truth you find in solitude is more valuable than the comfort you feel in conformity? Because if you can, you will discover something few people ever do, that your destiny is not found in the opinions of others. It's found in your ability to be with yourself fully, honestly, ruthlessly. That's where your power is. Not in being followed, but in being rooted. We don't talk about this enough. We celebrate collaboration, community, teamwork, and those are beautiful things, but they are not the source. They are the fruits. The source is solitude. The source is you alone in the dark, asking questions that terrify you, facing truths that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That's where the fire is lit. That's where the soul takes shape. Alone, but unstoppable. So I challenge you not to be alone for the sake of being different, but to be alone long enough to remember who you are without the world's input, to unplug from the algorithm of approval and sit in the sacred discomfort of your own raw, unfiltered self. Because that version of you, the one that emerges from the silence, is a version the world desperately needs. And the irony, once you become that version, you won't need validation. You'll become validation. You'll become a force that moves through this world, not with noise, but with presence, with stillness, with power that cannot be taken away because it was never given by anyone else. So let me ask you again, more directly this time, are you willing to lose the world to find your soul? And if the answer is yes, what are you still holding on to? The myth of the crowd, why most people keep you average, and how to break free without becoming bitter. We've all been told that success is a team sport, that we rise by lifting others, that community is everything. And there's truth in that, but only partial truth. The deeper philosophical reality, one that most people are too afraid to say out loud, is this. The crowd is not designed to make you great. It's designed to keep you average. Not out of malice, not because people are evil, but because the group, by its very nature, demands equilibrium. It resists anything that threatens its comfort, its norms, its unspoken agreements. And when you begin to rise, truly rise, you disrupt that equilibrium. You become a mirror, not of what people are, but of what they could be, and that makes them uncomfortable. Here's the paradox. Most people will cheer for your growth as long as it doesn't surpass theirs. The moment your evolution challenges their sense of identity, the cheering stops. The subtle sabotage begins. The jokes, the distance, the passive resistance. This isn't always conscious. It's just how human psychology works. The crowd survives by maintaining sameness, but greatness is born out of difference. And that's why the crowd is so dangerous. Not because it's evil, but because it's comfortable. And comfort is the enemy of transformation. So what does this mean for you and me? It means that if we want to become unstoppable, we must be willing to walk away from the gravitational pull of the group. Not in anger, not in superiority, but in clarity. We must understand that the very act of becoming exceptional requires distance. But not permanent isolation, but a sacred space where you can think thoughts the crowd doesn't think, speak words the crowd doesn't speak, and dream dreams the crowd doesn't dare dream. But here's the mistake most people make. When they start to wake up, they get bitter. They see the mediocrity around them and feel superior. They start to resent others for not understanding them. They adopt a philosophical arrogance that kills their humanity. That's not power. That's ego in disguise. True power doesn't need to belittle others. It just chooses not to be limited by them. You don't need to judge the crowd. You just need to outgrow it, quietly, consistently, relentlessly. This is where philosophical maturity comes in. But the ability to walk alone without walking away from compassion. You need to understand that people are where they are for a reason, and that you were once there too. You don't need to drag anyone forward. You don't need to explain yourself. You just need to live as proof that it's possible to evolve. That's how you lift others, not through argument, but through embodiment. But let me be direct. This path is not easy. It requires you to become comfortable with being misunderstood, to be okay with people thinking you've changed.
Spoiler, you have changed. That was the point. You're not supposed to stay the same. You're not supposed to keep shrinking yourself to fit into conversations that no longer nourish you. You're not supposed to keep entertaining friendships that exist only to maintain old versions of yourself. Growth is not betrayal. Growth is the highest form of integrity to yourself and, ironically, to the world. And yet the temptation is always there to go back, to turn it down, to soften your light so others won't feel blinded. But that's not love. That's self-abandonment. And every time you do it, you teach your nervous system that your truth is dangerous, that your power is a liability, that being liked is more important than being free. And you wonder why you feel stuck. So here's the question that demands ruthless honesty. Who in your life benefits from you staying small? Whose comfort are you protecting at the cost of your calling? And more importantly, why do you still think you owe them that? This is the moment where you must decide, not with your words, but with your life. Will you keep orbiting the crowd, chasing their approval, adjusting your velocity to match their gravity? Or will you break free, not in rebellion, but in revelation? Will you become the kind of person who doesn't need the crowd to feel powerful, because you've built that power on something deeper, something eternal? It's not about isolation, it's about elevation. And the air gets thinner at the top, not because it's lonely, but because fewer people are willing to breathe that deeply. Creative solitude. Why all great things are born in silence before they shake the world. Sit with this for a moment. Every masterpiece, every revolution, every timeless idea that has ever changed the course of human history began in silence. Not in a meeting room, not in a crowded forum, not on a trending feed. It began in the invisible space where a single human being wrestled with something greater than themselves. That is the sacred chamber of creative solitude. And in today's world where noise is currency and constant stimulation is the norm, that chamber is becoming endangered. But if you seek to create something real, something legendary, something that echoes beyond your lifetime, you must return to it. Why is solitude so essential to creation? Because creation is not addition, it's extraction. It is not about collecting more ideas, more input, more inspiration. It's about digging inward, pulling something from the deep, from the archetypal layers of self that cannot be accessed while you're distracted. The culture tells us to brainstorm in groups, to share early and often, to collaborate and iterate. But the greatest artists, thinkers, leaders, and visionaries knew better. They knew that before anything can be shared with the world, it must first be birthed in silence. Think of Beethoven, going deaf, but composing symphonies that still shake concert halls. Think of Van Gogh, alone in an asylum, painting visions that the world wasn't ready to understand. Think of Frida Kahlo, painting her physical and emotional pain into symbols that now speak across generations. Think of Nikola Tesla, who spent entire days in solitude, visualizing machines in his mind before ever touching a tool. These weren't just eccentric habits. This was the cost of genius. Solitude wasn't a luxury, it was the laboratory.
But why silence? Why solitude? Because in silence, we are finally forced to hear what is actually inside us. Not what we've downloaded from others, not what we've been trained to think, but what is uniquely ours. That's where the soul speaks. You cannot hear your soul in a group chat. You cannot hear your soul in a constant scroll. And if you go too long without that voice, you start to forget who you are. You start to mimic. You start to repeat. You become an echo instead of a vibration. Here's the real tragedy. Most people will never create their masterpiece. Not because they don't have one, but because they never gave themselves enough silence to find it. They stay addicted to stimulation, to busyness, to other people's voices, and so their best ideas remain unborn, trapped in the wound of potential, never given the stillness they need to emerge. You must protect your solitude, like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. Creative solitude is not just about producing things. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need constant feedback, someone who trusts their inner world, someone who knows how to sit in the discomfort of not knowing long enough for something original to emerge. But that's rare, and that's power. But let's not romanticize it. Solitude is not always beautiful, but often is brutal. You face your doubts, your fears, your limitations. There's no one there to applaud you, to reassure you, to validate what you're doing. And in that silence, the ego starts to panic. It whispers, what if this isn't good enough? What if no one understands? What if you're wasting your time? And that's exactly when you must stay. Because just beyond that egoic resistance is the breakthrough, the idea, the line, the vision, the thing you were born to bring into this world. So I ask you, when was the last time you were truly silent? Not just quiet, but silent. No music and no podcast, no notifications, that just you and your mind, you and your soul, you and the terrifying, liberating possibility that everything you're looking for out there might already be inside you, waiting. What would happen if you gave yourself 1 hour a day, just one, to be completely unreachable? What would you discover in that hour? And more importantly, what creation might be waiting to meet you there? Because here's the truth. The world will only reflect back what you first create in silence. Your public impact will never exceed your private clarity. And that clarity, the kind that changes lives, the kind that echoes across generations, is always born in solitude. The final separation. How letting go of the need to be understood unlocks ultimate freedom. There's one final threshold you must cross if you're serious about becoming unstoppable. It's not physical. It's not financial. It's not even intellectual. It's emotional. It's the quiet, invisible moment when you finally release the last tether holding you back, the need to be understood. This is the deepest separation, the one that doesn't just detach you from the crowd or from old paradigms or even from your past. It detaches you from the final illusion that your power depends on the comprehension, approval, or acceptance of others. And once you let that go, you don't just become powerful, you become free. Let's be honest. The desire to be understood is one of the most primal human instincts. But it begins in childhood, the need for a parent to see us, to affirm us, to reflect us back with love and clarity. But as we grow, that same desire mutates. It becomes a craving for validation, for likes, for applause, for someone to say, yes, I get you. It makes sense to me. And on the surface, that seems harmless, healthy even. But dig deeper, and you realize this. The need to be understood is often the very thing that keeps you from being true to yourself. Because here's the catch. The parts of you that are most original, most genius, most divine, will not be understood right away. They might not even be understood in your lifetime. And if you need them to be, you'll dilute them. You'll soften your edges. You'll make your truth more palatable, your ideas more acceptable, your vision more digestible.
And in doing so, you'll unconsciously amputate the very essence that made you powerful in the first place. Think of the greatest thinkers, artists, and leaders the world has ever known. Many of them were misunderstood, violently, profoundly, tragically. Socrates was executed. Galileo was silenced. Van Gogh died unknown. Kierkegaard was mocked. Jesus was crucified. And yet they stayed true. Why? Because they understood something most people never do. You are not here to be understood. You are here to embody what is true. And that's the final test. Can you say what must be said even if no one claps? Can you walk the path that calls you even if no one follows? Can you become who you were destined to be even if the people closest to you don't recognize you anymore? This is the moment where many break. They confuse rejection with failure, but they mistake misunderstanding as a sign to turn back. But it's not. It's a sign you're getting close. Because when you finally start living from your essence, rather than your ego, when you create from intuition, not imitation, when you speak, think, and move in alignment with your inner knowing, rather than outer expectations, that's when the resistance intensifies. Not because you're wrong, but because you're real. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing to be understood, you become unmistakably clear. People may not get you, but they'll feel you. They'll recognize the frequency of someone who is not performing, not pleasing, not pretending. But even if they can't explain it, they'll be magnetized by it. That's the kind of power that cannot be replicated because it's rooted in something eternal. So I leave you with this. What would you do differently if you no longer needed anyone to understand you? What would you stop explaining, defending, justifying? What would you finally create, say, become if you knew you didn't need to be applauded, only aligned? This is where the journey ends and begins. Alone, not in isolation, but in sovereignty. Lone, not in bitterness, but in truth. Alone, not because no one gets you, but because you finally get yourself. And from that place, you are no longer waiting to be seen. You are the vision. You are no longer chasing a voice. You are the frequency. You are no longer seeking power. You are the source. Alone, but unstoppable.